Hey guys, Paul Morrow here for OpsDesk.org again, doing our news recap at the end of a fairly busy news day. And let's go right to the biggest story that's bouncing around right now, which is this ill-advised Instagram post put out by James Comey. Now, look, I think there's a lot of obvious stuff here that's bouncing around. It was tremendously ill-advised for somebody who used to be the head of the FBI. And when you consider the fact that he's talking about a president that has survived 2 assassination attempts, one of them survived by the skin of his teeth, this was really ill-advised. But let me tease it out a little more and try to advance the story. I put this out on X. The term 86, which is what he used in the, with the shells, comes from, reportedly, I always heard around New York City that it comes from the address of the old Chumley's bar. Now, what is that? Chumley's was at 86 Bedford downtown. That was the address of this bar, and it goes back like 100 years. Chumley's was a speakeasy. And on 86 Bedford, it was kind of odd how you had to go in. You had to go in through the courtyard. And reportedly, back in the day, the staff would yell, "Ditch it, 86 it." There was some kind of code to, we're being raided during Prohibition. And apparently it was so common, this must have been a popular speakeasy, which I actually am not surprised by. It was a very cool bar. It fell into common parlance, and 86 came to mean to get rid of something. And they were hiding it from the authorities in Prohibition. Then it became a legit bar, but they grandfathered it in because it was in a very strange, it's part of a residential building, and you would go in through the courtyard. There was also there was a street address that was an unmarked door. That's actually where 86 was. And the residents hated the place because it was noisy. It's a bar. They lived in the building. And so about, 10, 12 years ago, in a bad break, because it was a very cool place, they were renovating it, and apparently they were doing something with the fireplace, and the people who did the work didn't really know what they were doing. They pulled out a retaining wall, and the ceiling collapsed. So in light of that, they had to redo the place. In redoing the place, the residents complained like crazy, and it looked like it wasn't going to survive. Now, my understanding is it reopened, but they had to completely renovate the place. It doesn't look like the old bar, which is a shame. The old bar was very much a literary hangout. They had old books on the wall and stuff that had supposedly either been written there or conjured there. The writers hung, Jack Kerouac hung out there and everything else. There was a trap door. The bartender, I was in there I used to go there. The bartender showed me behind the bar where you could lift up the floor and go down, and that's where they used to store stuff when it was being 86'd. So I got that story actually from the source, from the bar, and you can bounce around, you can see it online. But what's the point? The point is, this is a pretty well-known New Yorkism. It came from New York, reportedly, and 86 is something that fell into, like I said, national parlance for getting rid of something. And Comey was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District here in New York. He spent all kinds of time in New York. He knows what that means. He knew what that meant. And this idea that, well, I didn't know, now that's his line, is that I took it down, I didn't know that some people would perceive it as violence, just doesn't pass the giggle test. What subtle subtext are we supposed to believe he was referring to quote-unquote 86 Donald Trump legislatively, editorially? What was it that he meant if he didn't mean that? And also, by the way, his story now is that he just happened upon these shells and took a photo. Very likely, but equally as likely is he arranged the shells himself. Now, he says he didn't do that. That's what he put out. Well, Secret Service, U.S. Secret Service, is apparently going to go talk to him and do an investigation. And, investigations have been done on far less. And if you can see that there's, video of him arranging it, or if you can see that there's a witness, let's say, that says, I saw him arranging shells and taking photos, well, then he just lied to the Secret Service if that's what he tells them. And now he's in more trouble because, believe it or not, it's a crime, a felony, to lie to the feds in the context of an investigation. Now, I don't think it's going to get anywhere near that. I think they're going to talk to him. He's going to stick to his guns. I came upon the shells, and he probably did. But that said, who knows? Because it really shows you how poor his judgment was, what a shell he lives in himself. And it really it validates the view that so many of us have had about how far off track a lot of our federal authorities had gone. And I am not talking about the field agents. I worked with so many good agents, man. I got to stick up for them. I know it's a common meme these days to just destroy all of the FBI, and that's bullshit. I work with great guys, and they don't make a lot of money, man, and they moved them all over the country. That's not an easy life. I turned that job. I almost went for that job, and I was getting older. I knew I was going to age out, and when I saw the lifestyle, I was like, I don't know if this is for me. Right now, maybe they wouldn't have taken me. I don't know. But that said, that's a tough gig. And I'm not laying this on them, but their leadership had gone so far off track. That's why, thank God, we got new leadership over there who seems to get it. Because the leadership that they had in a guy like Comey, it just shows you that Comey really didn't understand the gravity of his job. And when you got an FBI agent who put right in his book that when Donald Trump came over to shake his hand, he wanted to hide behind the curtain, you got to say you had a screwball. And what I have always heard around New York with people who worked for him in Southern and people who worked with him elsewhere in the Bureau and, down in D.C., is that he's a weirdo. That's very commonly the theme. The guy's a weirdo, and I think he just proved it. All right? All right, enough on him. I think that this will be teased out over the next few days. I don't think it's going to go any further other than the fact that the guy's judgment is very poor, and hopefully he's never back in any important office. Let's go to Bryan Kohberger. I want to do this real quick. I was on the air today on Fox, and we talked about with the great John Roberts, one of the all-time just classic broadcasters, in my opinion, in the business. And we talked about the Bryan Kohberger case on his show with him and Sandra Smith. And the point we were making at the time was the fact that there is this reporting out that the Kohberger defense now has filed papers that are sealed naming an alternative suspect. And the judge seems not too happy with it. First of all, in the context of this case, we're almost down to the finish line before we begin. It's August 11th. The case is going to start jury selection. And in this case, that's like it's like almost 0 hour. The case has been going on 2.5 years. But the history of the defense in this case really seems to be on the judge's nerves, and rightly so. This is the defense that put forth the idea that they had an alibi. It made all kinds of news. Oh, Kohberger's got an alibi. Look at this. And the law for an alibi is that you have to present it before trial so that the prosecution has a chance to come forward and say, well, we checked that out and the alibi doesn't hold water. Or the alternative, we checked that out, the alibi holds water. We got the wrong guy. All right? When they press the defense and say, oh, look, you're going to have to demonstrate what's the alibi, which is the law, they couldn't do it. They came up with this idea that he's going to be driving around. He was driving around that night looking at the stars, and we're going to show cell tower information to corroborate that. And the judge just said, get out of here with that, all right? And the defense had to know that. And so, if I'm sitting with the judges, and I think that might have been the prior judge before they moved the case because they got to change the venue. But either way, the judge was like, no, that's not the law, and you should know that, all right? That's not going to pass the test. Then they came with this issue of him being autistic. And they wanted to present that in their case in chief, as it's called, right in the case during, proceedings, during the trial. And once again, the judge said, no, that's the idea that you're going to try to present the idea that he's autistic, and that is why he has a flat effect. That's the term that they used in the papers, as I recall it. No, that's not a defense. That doesn't have any bearing because he's not going to take the stand. All right, you can use it maybe as a mitigating factor if we get to sentencing because it's almost like a mini trial if he's found guilty, and then they have to decide if he gets the death penalty or not. But the judge said no to that. But in both instances, the judge did put the caveat in that said, if he takes the stand, if Kohberger takes the stand, well then, sure, we can bring these things in. But boy, is that a double-edged sword, because if you're the defense, you want that guy taking the stand? Yeah, he may have a flat effect. Maybe you'll think, wow, man, it looks a little autistic. So what? That doesn't justify killing 4 people the way he did, if in fact he's found to be guilty and he's still innocent until proven guilty. But also, if he takes the stand, he opens himself up to all the other questioning. And that guy's got a lot of things that he's open to, if you've been following the case. But here's the other thing with that has developed since I was on the air. Apparently, the judge now has indicated to both sides that if you want me to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate the leaks that seem to have occurred over the last couple of weeks in this case, I will. And this is a whole separate issue. It reminds me a little bit of the Karen Reed case. Any of you who are not watching it, you got to watch on Fox Nation Fridays at 3. I got my show. We're looking at the the Karen Reed case with expert witnesses, including this week. I'm sorry, expert lawyers, analysts. But this week, we have a juror from the first trial who's going to be a guest. And that's going to be really interesting as we examine what went on this week in the Karen Reed case. We're going to have one of the jurors from the first trial that ended in a mistrial with us. And that, is going to really be compelling television, I believe. But to get back to the point, in the Reed case, there's a whole separate trial going, a separate case, I should say. Didn't go to trial yet, but it very well could, where there is all this information about this guy, Turtle Boy, who was apparently, he's been accused of trying to intimidate jurors and maybe even witnesses outside of the context of the case, and he got arrested. And reportedly, he had numerous, like as in dozens of interactions with Karen Reed, who she initially denied it. So that's like a whole separate thing that's going on outside the case. With this Kohberger thing, apparently the judge is livid that stuff leaked, and Dateline NBC did a 2-hour special last week on it, which was quite compelling because they had evidence nobody's ever heard. And I was very surprised. I watched it, and I was quite surprised because the operational security, the OPSEC as we call it, the OPSEC of the task force had been quite good. I was out in Idaho a number of times when the case was developing and put my neck out to defend them. When a lot of people are saying they're never going to solve this, they're Keystone small town cops and everything, I was saying, never about the agency. It's about people. It's about specific people. Any agency, I don't care what it is, if you got good people, they can solve the case. And together with the FBI and the Idaho State Police, the Moscow PD got it done. And, I won't lie, I felt justified by the fact that they brought it in, and they brought it in comparatively quickly. I said, it's going to be a while. They got to do the subpoenas. You got to do a lot of legal process, and then you got to analyze this stuff. But they got it done. And they didn't leak. I was out there defending them. You would think at some point somebody would have said, hey, Paulie, thanks for for sticking up for us. I'll give you a little tidbit you can report on the air. And, I stayed away from it. I got to be honest. I didn't want to in any way involve myself in the case, and to the point that I could be the story, which a lot of journalists are not aware of. Maybe it's because I've been on the other side of it. Journalists have tried me when I was working in high-profile cases and stuff, so I'm sensitive to that. But nonetheless, the point is, nobody was talking from that task force. Well, now somebody did. And this is going to be a mess for somebody because they're going to do it. I almost certainly think they're going to do it. Why would you not? If you're the defense, you got nothing to lose because the evidence against Kohberger is very strong. So you're going to say, yeah, appoint that. And if you can find out that somebody on the prosecution team was leaking to Dateline stuff from Kohberger's phone, his search history, the fact that he was watching stuff that was relative to Ted Bundy, and that he was dressing himself to look like Ted Bundy used to dress. He moved to the Pacific Northwest, by the way, where Bundy was active. The audio tape that purportedly is probably, I hate to say it, the last moments of Xana Kernodle's life. I was amazed watching the video. I was actually kind of appalled, and it didn't feel right to me. And, myself and a number of my colleagues, we were discussing, how did they get this stuff? Well, now the judge had the same question. And I think this is going to go forward, and we're going to have a drama within the drama relative to Kohberger. This bears watching. And then the last big story of the day that I want to talk about is the Menendez brothers. Real quick, people are asking me about it. Look, this thing has been well lawyered. You can't deny it. My own personal feelings, and I'm just going to sum this up, is the following. Whatever happened to these guys, I go back, I default, we could relitigate the evidence from here until doomsday, their actions after the murders, the stuff with getting the will out of the safe, going on the spending spree, their story changing, their lies that they were caught in. You can relitigate all that. There are other areas, there are other places, other podcasts and stuff, that other venues that have ground that into the ground. There's a good podcast that I did with Kennedy on Fox that I think really teased this out pretty well. And if I recall, there's a good one on the Fox True Crime podcast I did with Emily Campagno, which was very good as well. But that said, and I'm sure there are others that I don't know about, but I want to get to this. This is the piece that I just can't get around. They shot the father, they killed him. And it was apparently really brutal. All right. And these were experienced detectives, and they said it was one of the worst crime scenes they've ever seen. They shot the mother. She had defensive wounds. She put her hand up. Okay. She didn't die. All right, now they're using a shotgun that they very artfully bought with stolen ID that they stole from an associate, a friend, reportedly. They went to a different county to buy it, all sort of stuff. Okay, so it was very premeditated. They shot the mother. She didn't die. She's crawling away. Lyle, he's out of bullets. Eric's outside. Lyle does the shooting. Lyle goes outside, gets more ammunition, reloads, goes back in, finishes the mother off by essentially blowing her head apart. All right? Not to be too graphic, but that's what happened, and it matters. The mother is not accused, even by them, of molesting anybody. Their initial justification for doing what they did to the mother was that she was under the thumb of the father and they were freeing her from a life of sort of servitude, for lack of a better term. Then it morphed into they did it because the mother had countenanced the abuse. Now, I don't want to get into the issue of abuse. All right, that's going to be, another 4-hour podcast. Although I will tell you this idea that we've evolved so much. I remember the case. It was one of the first big televised cases. Nobody thought anything different about a potential molestation. Nobody thought it was okay. That's asinine. I don't know, that's become the received wisdom. Well, we've evolved as a society. Maybe in certain ways, but I remember at the time, nobody thought, well, these guys got molested, so what? What really happened at the time, I can just tell you, is nobody believed it. But, okay, separate issue. But what they did to the mother, I just can't get past. These guys looked at their mother, or at least the main shooter did, which in this case reportedly was Lyle, crawling away on her hands and knees for her life, knowing that she just saw her husband get blown apart by her sons, and then was crawling away for what was left of her life. And, I'm sure her body was all banged up. He probably blew her hand apart. Her head was probably really banged up. She's crawling away. There's a blood trail. And he comes up, and she looks at him. He looks at her, and he finishes her off. That's enough for me that these guys have forfeited their right. I don't care what they've done in jail. More power to them. It probably made their jail lives better. But from where I sit, you have forfeited your life to be free and to be a part of this American society. That's my sort of last word on Menendez, and I don't see that changing no matter what evidence is put forth. And by the way, my prediction is they will be getting out. And then there's a book and a movie and a TV show, and they're going to be TikTok stars. That's not how this should go. I'm Paul Morrow for the Ops Desk, and I will see you tomorrow at 3 on Fox Nation for our weekly Karen Read recap. Until then, all of you, please stay safe.